Cool. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us tonight. Well, it's night here in California. And for those of you who are watching a recording of this, we really look forward to hearing your feedback and hearing your thoughts and reflections on our conversations. I'm Jesse Coffino. I work very closely with Krystina Tapia, my colleague who's here, and with a lot of really incredible people around the world to share the work of an educator in Anji County, China, Miss Cheng Shui-Chin, and her families and children there. We've put together this incredible group of people, of educators around the world, who come together frequently to reflect on their practice, their experience. And so we're really, really fortunate to be joined tonight by Elisabeth Tam. Elisabeth is a mother of two. She is a teacher of young children. She works as a kindergarten teacher at Saigon South International School in Vietnam. She's part of a small group of educators that work together around these ideas of Anji play and true play. And so rather than go into a detailed description of those ideas, I welcome everybody to check out our websites at anjiplay.com, trueplayfoundation.org, check here on the Facebook page for updates, and just check back and see where we are. We're having these, what we call True Play check-ins on a semi-regular basis. We're really excited for people that have kind of found us and are dropping in, and we'll have it available for everybody forever on the internet. And so Elisabeth is joining us today from Saigon, Vietnam, and where you are, I think you're in your 14th week of lockdown, is that right?
Right. Thank you for having me, both of you, Jesse and Krystina. Technically, we're not really on lockdown anymore because our students are slowly coming back to school, but this is for me as a kindergarten teacher and my teammates and early childhood teachers, this is the 14th week of virtual school. And technically we come back next week. So we're really excited to see our students. Here in Vietnam, they have done a really phenomenal job of sort of containing the virus through contact tracing. And we've had a really high success rate of recoveries, but also no deaths in the country. So I think that's why a lot of my friends from the United States are kind of shocked that we're coming back to school. But it feels like within this country, the borders have been closed. Anyone that's coming within the country is immediately quarantined upon arrival. So within the city limits, you feel pretty safe traveling around. We're still required to wear masks at school, on campus. And the government is actually kind of like incredibly responsive, but also the situation is pretty fluid. Things change quickly. So we really didn't anticipate to see our children. I think most teachers at school, when we found out that we were coming back, were like, really? So we've been processing that. You know, it's been a journey for all of us, no matter where we live. And I think even here, though we were a little bit ahead of the rest of the world, it felt like, aside from maybe China, it's still surprising for us, you know, to think about welcoming students back on campus with very different precautions that are being put into place and procedures that are very strictly being adhered to. So for us, it feels like a celebration at this point. And I think we all know that we're not out of it. You know, this is definitely something that's going to continue to affect our lives and what the school year looks like next year as well. But for right now, I think what we're mostly trying to do is just live in the moment. I think that this virus has taught all of us to be more fluid and flexible and know that things change rapidly. So that, to me, has been a big takeaway from living in Vietnam, but also seeing the way that the country and the government has handled the situation, but also, you know, helped me think about maybe it is okay that kids come back to campus. So that's kind of where we are right now with getting ready to welcome our students.
And I really appreciate that background on sort of the situation at the national level, maybe even more at the local level for you, particularly, you know, as we work with a lot of programs in the United States, with programs in other parts of the world. As you mentioned, there's so much that's unknown. There's so much uncertainty. There's so much change. That we can really learn a lot from the people who are in other parts of the world that are figuring this out as well. So there's this really great opportunity for us to reflect. But I also just want to make really clear from our perspective that with all these experiences out there, we're not making any recommendations about what schools should do. That, you know, following local guidance, following regional guidance, following, you know, the best decisions made on the best consideration of the information is really important. So I'm just super excited to hear what's going on there. I know Krystina just mentioned to me that in Anji, they're going back this week. And so, yeah, there's a lot to learn from, there's a lot to reflect on, but I just wanna put it out there that for us, we're not making any recommendations about what people should do. But I wanna get back to this before we get to the excitement of seeing your kids again, because we know that this is so difficult for so many teachers and parents and schools, you know, to have all this distance, to be pulled away from, you know, the children you work with every day. What does it look like in that 14 weeks? You know, we talk so much about the critical value of like relationships, listening, and just being present for children, and obviously the value of play. What does that look like for you in your program?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And luckily I've had you two to talk to throughout this process. So it's been nice to check in and kind of think about the work of Anji Play and sort of what that looked like before quarantine and lockdown, but also during, you know, virtual school is what we've called it here. And I think initially it felt like very shocking for all of us, you know, as we started to get more information and understand the severity of the situation and how quickly people had to act. I remember very clearly coming back from the Vietnamese Lunar New Year holiday, and it was sort of an interesting time frame where it fell on the calendar this year, where we had just a quick break, and then we were back from our winter break, and then we were gone again. And the children were back with me for a week, the last week in January, and January 31st was the last day that I got to be with them on campus. And in our mind, you know, we had every intention of seeing them a couple of days later. And, you know, as I said before, this country has acted very quickly. So we knew pretty much over the weekend that we would not be back on campus with children. We didn't know what that looked like or how long it would last or what that meant for communication. We really had no plan. And it was sort of like coming together as a community, as a faculty, as our head of school guided us through it. And initially we did not do Google Meets. We didn't even know how we were going to keep in touch. And I think, you know, when you think about a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, you're not imagining having a conversation with them on a computer. You know, for me, that was more like talking to my family far away, and my kids would get to talk to their grandparents, but I had never, ever done anything online with children before. So as we started to understand what this meant, and maybe that we wouldn't be coming to school anytime soon, we started to think about it and how we could maintain those relationships. And not only maintain the relationship, but make sure that we were providing the best support for the families, because many, just like all across the world, many parents have local businesses and restaurants, and they really rely on people being able to come and visit. And I think that was sort of something that you also have to work through, is that it's not just affecting the children, but it's really affecting their families. And some of them are very stressed and are losing jobs and losing their businesses. So we really, I felt as a school, were incredibly respectful of those scenarios. We continued to come to campus as teachers because at that point it was not a lockdown. There wasn't social distancing happening yet. So we would come to campus. We would eventually begin to start to talk to our students. And the kids were sort of confused. You know, I don't think they quite understood, why are you there and I'm not? And we just would have really quick conversations with them and just say, you know, how are you doing? How's it going at your house? And that was sort of the beginning process of establishing contact. As things went on, we began to provide more of a structure, because we felt like that was probably the most important thing, was just maintaining routines of some kind. We all know how important those are for small children, but also for us as adults. And I think we tried to be, we did not require, it was not mandatory, it was merely suggestions about what could continue to happen in their households. And a lot of it was around meals and play and cleaning. And then, you know, if we got pictures from kids, we were really excited. We have something that we use here called Seesaw, and it's a way for children to post work, and it's sort of like an online journal. And that was another way that we would send information to families. And we tried to also be concise about how much, because I think as a parent myself, there's this massive onslaught of emails coming from the head of school and the principal, and depending on the principal of which section of the school my child or children are in, it could be multiple emails a day. Then your teacher is responding to, checking on the child. So I think we had to really like slow down as a school and think about, this is really hard for families. Number one, there's something happening in the world, a pandemic, and they're now trying to, care for their children, keep their jobs, do all these things at the same time. And really, I think we have to rethink everything that we've been doing, because we're not with those people anymore. And, I can't welcome my children into the classroom and ask them, how's it really going at home when they're at home with their families? So I think for us as a school, it went through many, many iterations of what it's become now. But the most important thing for my team, my kindergarten team and myself, was to really honor the families, respect their situations as individuals, but also make some accommodations for people. If it meant that they couldn't speak to me from 9 to 11 a.m. in the morning, but they could maybe talk at a different time, I would try to talk to their child at that time. I think that, what this has really taught me is that every family has so many things happening at their home, regardless of this kind of situation. And we can't forget what that looks like for each child and each family. And slowing down a lot was a huge requirement of us. I think we're a fast-paced school, and we just couldn't do that anymore. We had to give families time. So I think there's been a lot of just reflecting on what's most important. It's the mental health of the children. It's, how they're feeling. Are they feeling safe? Are they feeling like they have a home and food? And, we are pretty lucky to not have a lot of families that are in that situation, but I know that families are still very stressed. And some children have not been able to stay at the school as a result. Some children have gone back to their home countries, and we are still talking to them on Google Meets from Taiwan or from Japan. And we have to respect that that's what is the most important thing for their family. So I think, that gets to some of the beginnings of what virtual school looked like for us, was sort of, being here, but also pulling back and letting them respond to us on their own timeline and their own time frame, and not having too many expectations of them initially, especially.
And I really like this focus on sort of clarity, on taking a deep breath. I think oftentimes, we're tempted to say like particularly now, but really it's more just shining sort of a light on where things are right now at this particular point in time. Because you can say in a crisis, you want a leader that communicates simply and clearly about the things they know and be honest about the things they don't know, right? And so honestly, that should just be all the time. If you're the leader of the school, you should always do that. Now, if you're not doing that, it's particularly, you can feel it. But if you're doing it right, as it sounds like you guys were working on, not overloading parents with a lot of information, being really clear, really simple in your expectations. For us in our professional development work, as you know, and as we're talking now, like reflection is a big part of our work. And we've kind of moved from a place of spending a lot of time talking about theory or talking about history, and seeing like what are the simplest expectations we can have of just adults around children, right? Like take a video of a kid playing, step back and take a video, like have that be the only expectation. So I really appreciate sort of this idea that particularly now there's a lot of anxiety, like how do we respond to families' needs? And one of those, please.
Well, and I was going to say, and I think that, it's important to realize that those family needs are constantly evolving. Like I remember you sharing with us, Elisabeth, like your parents' journey through this, and how the parents you were working with, you would, when you first were trying out what this virtual school is like, you provided a certain type of, work or, things for the children to engage in, and then the parents had a reaction. Do you mind talking about just kind of like the way that the parents have progressed through this and how their thinking has shifted as you've been in the situation for a little bit longer?
Yeah, I mean, I actually listened to an online, I think it was a podcast, or actually it wasn't a podcast, it was some kind of online forum for other teachers, international school teachers, and I took away just a few things. I think every situation is different, But one of the things I heard one of the teachers say was that they'd started to open up dialogue for families only on like Fridays or Mondays or something like that. And I kept thinking to myself, we haven't done that, and why are we not asking these parents, aside from our emails and, seesaw updates and things like that, like what are they really feeling at home? And again, in our attempt not to overwhelm families, we didn't send out a survey initially. We decided to at some point with very general, just kind of to the point questions, but like 5, we didn't want to overwhelm them more, but it was sort of like, what's been working in virtual school for you and what do you wish you could change? And I think the more that I had those opportunities and created them for families to check in with me, so many things that we take for granted as educators that we just know, and we know about kids, parents start to doubt themselves so much at home, and they are also stressed and multitasking and possibly with other siblings at home trying to manage what that situation looks like. A parent in my class has 3 children under the age of 6, and during the lockdown, before the children, the children were gone, but I was still here, she brought me chocolate cake one day. And she just thanked me and said, I'm eating a lot because I'm really stressed out. And I felt for her in a way that I thought, wow, I just don't want to miss out on these opportunities to connect with families right now, because here we are at school worrying about the children and how to best support them and what virtual school is going to look like. But we're also, I think it took a lot of stages of us to also realize we need to be checking in with parents too, to see how they're doing, because they are doing their very best to keep themselves sane, their children fed, happy and rested. And I think, when we started to check in with parents, a lot of those parents would say to me, well, I read the directions and I thought this is what I was supposed to do. And now I'm not sure if this is the right thing. And I was able to kind of reassure them, like, you know what? They're 5 and 6-year-old children. They're in kindergarten. They have a long journey ahead of them. The entire world is at a standstill at this point. I think at that point I said to them, 90% of the world's children are out of school. So I think we have to rethink what your virtual learning looks like at home with your child. And if your child wants to write you a letter or wants to draw something or wants to play a game with you, that's the most important thing that you can do with them today, and if you can't be with them and do those things and they're off doing their own thing, that's amazing too. And I think that the videos and the photos that I was receiving in the beginning, or the lack thereof, started to shift. And I think a lot of my comments and feedback that I could give them through either like an audio recorded message on Seesaw, or just I would sometimes take videos of myself for that particular child, I could see a little bit of freedom happening at home, where it became less formulaic and much more, spontaneous photos. I mean, I had, I think this is what maybe you were asking me about, Krystina. I had a child who was making some kind of recipe and her mother was filming her, and it was the most beautiful video. I don't even know that the mom thought it was, but for me, it was exactly what I was like, thank you for capturing this. I felt lucky to see the video. They're making something and my student is, pouring flour all over the table. There's this giant mess and her mom is saying nothing. She's just filming her. And it's just beautiful because she's so happy. She's making a pie and she's, talking about the ingredients and how much she's going to need. And, that was the video. And I wrote back and I said, you're doing an amazing job at home. This is exactly what I hope that you're enjoying, having this time with your daughter, but also that that I can't ask you to do any more than this. This is perfect. And I feel like I've had a lot of those conversations individually with parents to say, everything you're doing is amazing. And I decided one day, about 6 to 7 weeks into virtual school, I was feeling quite ragged myself as a parent. And I thought, I need to make a video for just parents and just thank them, regardless of what they've sent me, what their children have, been doing or not been doing, doesn't matter to me. As long as I've, gotten to see their face or hear from their family and I know they're doing okay, that's all that matters. And I just sent a really quick video and thanked them all. And, just told them they were doing amazing jobs as parents, because I feel like we need to hear that more often. We need to know that whatever our scenarios are, we're doing the best that we can. And that's all that you can ask during this time. It's not something any of us has ever been through in our lives. And I think that, we have moments, it's sort of a roller coaster ride. And I think all of us as faculty have the benefit of being here together for so long without students. Not a benefit, but I think we could process a lot of it together, and then we were sent home and then nobody was on campus. So that was a whole different thing to get used to. And the more that we all sort of reflected on each of those stages that we've been through, we've thought a lot about, Jesse and I were just talking about this, like what do I want to do with my teaching practice? Like, how do I want to be with children? What do I expect of families? How am I going to be inclusive of all types of people who maybe can't spend all day long working with their children on virtual school, but maybe one parent can take one photo and send it to me. I think we've had to really continue to reflect on that process, as a community, but also as individuals about what really matters during this time. So I think, I've been really fortunate to have great families who I think know how much I support them and love them. And I, whether I got to see the kids back at school or not, I felt like they knew that what they were doing was all that mattered, that they, it was the most important thing for them in that moment, whatever it was that they could share with me. And even if it was their kid doing a worksheet, I hate to say that, but I think for some families that made them feel good too, to know that like, hey, we've accomplished something today. And, give yourself credit for that as a parent too, because everyone's situation is different. It might not be exactly what I want them to be doing, but, they're not with me, and I can't ask families to do more than that. So,
and, in a really beautiful way, you're describing sort of meeting everyone where they are,
yeah.
allowing them to be seen and be heard, and then responding to their needs in an authentic way, that focuses on where they are and what's, the good things that are happening.
Right.
I think, for me as a parent, I realized that one of the challenges was, when you have a child and you want them to play independently, and if you verbally make it clear that it's time for them to play independently, they kind of understand, there's different ways of doing that. Like there's the play independently and I'll be really present and observe. There's like the play independently and I'll be somewhere else. That generally speaking, when you tell a young child, like do something on your own, it's clear to them that you're going to go do something else, right? And so something that I've just found has been really helpful has been at those moments, when I can be there, right? Whether it's breakfast or lunch or dinner or any other time during the day, if you can really make those about listening, right? About listening to your child's needs, their expression, what they're interested in, that like a lot of that relational need, that relationship should be part of everything. And so I think for a lot of parents, something that I tell a lot of parents is just find those moments to listen where they are, like take them as they come. And like as much as you can be present, like you're saying, and I'm so thank you so much for bringing this up. There's so much anxiety for all of us right now. Change, even if we're fortunate enough to, have a little bit of backstop where we don't have to worry about a rent this month. We have a little bit of backstop where we can eat this month. There's still a huge amount of anxiety with all this change. But yeah, I think both recognizing it for parents, right? Like you're saying, like recognizing it in parents, because once you can recognize it in parents, it'll be much easier for them to do that to somebody, right? Like it's always easier to embody the thing that somebody has embodied for you in some sense. And so I think that just this idea of listening, of like really hearing where parents are, but I think also, and this is just a message to the parents out there, that when you can find time to listen to your child, whenever it is, it makes everything so much better. It really does. And it doesn't mean it doesn't make everything so much better. I mean, the anxiety is still going to be there, but we're much stronger as families and as individuals, when we're listening and we're being heard, right? And so with children, if you're not listening to children and you spend most of your time trying to get them to listen to you, that's a pretty lopsided, asymmetrical relationship. So I'm just wondering, for you as a parent, negotiating this, right? Having children at home and then having to attend to other people's children, and like other people as parents. How do you strike that balance? Is there any great advice you can share? Or wins, losses?
Like you said, it's a learning process. I think it's like It has been very, very, very hard. My husband is, fortunately, he's at home. So for those 6 weeks, 7 weeks, when I was still required to be on campus, he was sort of really the big rock and support in our family, and continued to be even when I came home, because I was still in my room on calls, and not every family has that advantage either. There might be single parenting and situations and things like that, or where both parents really are still required to work. I have families within my class where that is the situation, and a sibling is helping them to get online or to complete work. So again, I think we have to be aware of those situations, and that every family is not going to be the same or look the same. But for me, just personally balancing that relationship with not only my partner, but my children, and I have a 13-year-old who's in middle school and an 8-year-old who's in second grade. I have, quite different age spans. And for my middle schooler, this has been really challenging. For a while, he was thriving. He had no distractions, and he was sort of able to keep going. And then at some point, it just sort of kicked in that he was clearly not able to maintain that level of consistency with work and expectations, because he really needed that teacher feedback and that, kind of peer pressure, the positive peer pressure,
right,
where you're seeing other people doing things. And that was really hard for us as a family to work through some of those moments. I mean, as we speak, quite honestly, my child is still pretty far behind in his assignments. And there's a part of me that's really grappling with that, because it's like, I want to know how he's feeling about things. I want to best support him, but it's such an odd time to have a conversation with him, because it's nothing that he's ever experienced or I have. We're not a homeschool family where I'm, used to teaching him at home. And I think for him, it's like, I just try to keep reminding him this is temporary. It doesn't feel like it's going to end. It does feel like it's going to go on forever. But even when he's back on campus, he's still sort of working through coming back to school and what that means. And like you said, Jesse, it's like, I'm just trying to listen to him. I'm trying to not lecture so much. I'm trying to remember what it feels like to be a 13-year-old and what it must have felt like to be in virtual school, and then to come back and still have the expectation to complete all this work that was assigned. And I think that, it'll be really interesting to me to know what he thinks later in his life, when he's a little older and he can reflect back to this time. But I guess, it comes back to the same philosophy I've had with my 5 and 6-year-old students. How are you feeling about yourself? How are you coping? That's really the most important thing to me, that I've tried to let him know that it's not about your grades. It's not about your assignments. It's about you taking time for yourself and still finding pleasure in the day, and still remembering that life goes on outside of this. And we still have to kind of keep resuming our lives, despite these weird unknowns and these situations that we can't even predict what will happen next. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, for my second grader, who loves school and loves being with her teachers and loved being with her friends, and not to say that my son didn't, but it was devastating to her. I think she really, really put her foot down and was like, I won't do this. And my husband and I were kind of like, oh, wow, we weren't expecting that. We thought she'd sort of love still getting to do school. It's like that part of your life when you're 8 and your friends are really important and your teachers, and you love doing things that are school-like, and it took everything to sort of convince her, but we really backed off. We really just were like, okay, if this isn't something that you can do today, then that's okay. And so she kept herself very busy reading books and writing things and making art and doing all kinds of other stuff. And I think there were a lot of cool things that came out of the time that I was able to be with her. And I feel like she, in some ways, has matured from this situation, where now, right at the end of it, she started to kind of get a handle of what it felt like to submit her work online and to have a Google meeting with her teacher and the rest of her classmates. I think that in the beginning was very overwhelming for her and intimidating and a little bit, I don't want to do that. And I feel like, my advice to get back to that would be just honor where your child is. The way that we need to give ourselves grace and other families grace, we need to do that for our children, because this is such an extraordinarily challenging time for all of us. And I think when I look back at all of this, because eventually we will move past this, it might be a different kind of thing that we're getting used to after. It might not look the same as what it was before, but we will move past this. We will go back to school. We will eventually be together. I don't want to remember this time as a time that I was yelling at my children or lecturing them or putting pressure on them, to do certain things, because I really want them to be okay with, being sad and missing people and feeling like they want to be at school with people, but they can't be, or that they want the school year to be over because they're just tired of it. Like, that's valid, and I think as adults, we hear each other out, we listen to each other vent and we're like, yeah, you're right. That's so frustrating. But with kids, we tend to want to fix their problems, or we sort of dismiss it a little bit and we make it seem like it'll be fine, just wait till next year. And I've said those words and I've had to stop myself and be like, yeah, you're right. This totally stinks. And I guess that's just my, one of my biggest pieces of advice, just to keep your own sanity, but also to remember that your relationship with your child is very different than the relationship that your child has with their teacher. And to expect that you can slip into that role and just masterfully teach your child at home and navigate this world is putting a lot of pressure on yourself that I think is unnecessary. And I think if teachers are doing that to parents, they need to stop, because it's not okay for us to ask that of families. I think that, like I said earlier, you check in with your families. You also respect that if they don't respond to you, then maybe they just can't talk to you right now, but it's not personal. And I think sometimes teachers can do that too, where we're like, well, why hasn't that family contacted me? And I think that it's not about us right now. It's about them trying to maintain some kind of normalcy in their household. And I've really learned that through this process too, that, we really don't know what people are dealing with at home. So the more that we can be kind to ourselves, be kind to, whether you are a teacher and you are, having expectations of your students or their families, to just maybe slow down and think about, when this is over, what will I feel good about, that I have really stuck to and honored, these families. And I think that's kind of my overall feeling as a parent and as a teacher, is just like, these are strange times.
It's so interesting because, a lot of parents don't really spend much time with their kids outside of on the weekends. And even then, parents are very busy. The weekends, you often have things scheduled and it's kind of a special time for whatever reason, right? And also us as educators, we send our kids to school too. So we're all sort of reorienting ourselves with what it looks like to be together for long periods. Yeah. I think, it's really amazing for you, Elisabeth, because you're a really great teacher. For a lot of those really great teachers out there, you do have a lot of really useful information about those children that can help parents, right? So I think oftentimes when we think of like a parent-teacher meeting, or like kind of more formalized interactions between teachers and children, it's often kind of summative, like, here's what your child's been interested in, here's what they're doing, look at this great picture, like, here's what they're learning. But there's also this opportunity where we just know, whereas you as a teacher, you just know these kids, right? Like, there are things about them that that, their parents might not even know, like how they respond to certain things. So I think as teachers, obviously first, taking care of yourself, taking care of your family. I know especially, there are a lot of teachers and there are a lot of schools out there that are really hurting financially now. So I know that for different teachers, there's different levels of stress and like even, expectations when they're not getting paid, things like that. So obviously taking care of ourselves first, but then realizing that like knowledge that we have about children that we often take for granted can be really helpful to parents to either contextualize their child's behavior so they know it's not abnormal or it's not a problem, sharing our just general developmental knowledge, right? Like, it takes children longer to respond to things. So, be patient. But I think you're also really right, which is like, you don't have to offer unsolicited advice. Like, you're not telling parents how to be teachers. Like, that's not a realistic expectation. And setting people up with unrealistic expectations, as we know with children or with educators, is kind of setting up people to fail. And like not be happy, but also not really trust, the support that you're giving them. So I really appreciate that reflection on like that balance between like what we think of as the ideals that as professionals we could create in a school environment for multiple children versus kind of the realities of having, children at home. My personal experience, with a 5.5-year-old has been really interesting because she's kind of a homebody. She likes to be outside when we get her outside. She's very social. She loves her friend, but she loves being with us. She loves being indoors. She loves drawing and doing all that stuff. I think for us with sort of coronavirus and COVID-19, again, we were really upfront from the beginning, just like, we don't really know what's going to happen. And we're really fortunate in that it seems like children aren't really that affected by this, but we're doing this to, protect your grandparents, your nana, yaya, who you love, and to protect all those other people out there, who this is a lot worse for. The reason I think that's critical, at least in my family, is that if you're going to throw a lot of uncertainty at a child, a lot of sudden change at a child, like where's that safety that you can create? And part of that safety is trust and being straightforward and clear and simple. But part of that safety is also saying that, you play a role in this. Like you have a responsibility in keeping other people safe. So I think oftentimes, and this is speaking as the father of a younger child, but not underestimating a child's ability to understand things that seem complicated to us, as long as we're clear about it and we're like as unemotional as we can be about it. I remember once I was on an airplane and I think the flight attendant, maybe it was her first or second day on the job, because we were hitting some really bad turbulence, and she got on a loudspeaker and she said, "Everything's gonna be fine. Just put on your seatbelt." And nobody was reassured by that message, right? That was a clear, simple message, but that was tinged with the kind of emotion that doesn't make you feel safe, right? And so, as teachers, we can create, or as educators, we can create these emotional boundaries. We can reflect on our needs versus the child's needs. In families, kind of all bets are off. We can try really hard to listen. We can try really hard to reflect. These are our families. It's complicated. It's super complicated. But I would just say that children also thrive with a degree of responsibility. And if they feel like they're part of something bigger or part of a group, like that can help, make not make the situation better or more tolerable, but at least like make it seem less pointless in some sense. I don't know if that makes sense, right? Like, it's like enough, like, I'm not going to get hurt. Like, let me back to school. Like, we don't even know what this is. Let me, but no, I mean, if you can reframe it, I mean, I think we're really lucky. We're really lucky because this isn't like a highly contagious hemorrhagic fever where like 70% of people who get it, like, die sadly. Like, we're in a position where we can make children feel really safe. And we can do things that can make us safe. So again, I really appreciate just this idea of not putting unreasonable expectations on people, of like meeting people where they are, of listening. But then again, I think, we think of political leaders or we think of school leaders, but, teachers are really important leaders for children, for their families. And I mean, children and families, you don't go back to work if your child isn't taken. I mean, turn of the century Italy, Maria Montessori, a lot of that had to do with both parents going to work and kids becoming sort of delinquent. But, the foundation of a lot of our structures, the ways that we move forward, have to do with the fact that other people are taking care of our children. At least in a lot of sort of the Western, societies, or, upper middle class places that we occupy. There's just this understanding that it's something that other people have to deal with. So, providing that safety and that listening, again, is, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, some of the things that I've been thinking about lately as well is, again, with this question of uncertainty and sudden changes, I know you all have like a summer break. And I'm wondering if you've talked about or if you've considered what it looks like to come back to an in-person setting. I know you guys, your older grades have come back, and you got the younger kids coming back next week. Have you thought at all about what like a blended situation looks like? Because for us, we're looking at this and we're thinking, okay, and this is very America specific, but you start opening up, the infection rate goes up again, schools close and they open, they close and they open, and kids will have to leave because of contact tracing, they've been exposed. So you're going to have a lot of smaller class sizes, modified class sizes, kids coming in and out, probably fewer teachers at the school because at least in the States, it's not likely you'll have a full class size. What does it look like in your mind to have children both coming to school, leaving school suddenly, children whose maybe parents aren't super comfortable with them being at school quite yet? Have you guys thought about that, talked about that? What is your thinking around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's one of those kind of like the next wave of things as they hit you, you're like, oh, right, we have to think about all of those things. And, for quite a while, like I said, we weren't even sure that kids would be returning because there has been so much precaution taken about which grade should come first and how many of those children should come. Just for 12th grade alone in Ho Chi Minh City, I think that was 1,500 students all going into school on the same day. And that's a lot of people. And so, there's a lot of debate about, I've even been reading articles about, younger kids starting first. So I think it's obviously that situation is different depending on where we live, but we have talked about the possibility of what this will look like in just a few months. We say next year, but it's August, and I think that, for those people, even travel, summer plans, everything's changed. I think most people know they're staying within Vietnam. No one's traveling outside. We have students who obviously will not be coming back. I have a student in my class that has left in December for a holiday and has not come back from the United States yet. And I think they intend to at some point when borders open, but we will continue to provide virtual school for her as long as she's enrolled in our schools. So we've already talked about kind of that hybrid model for children that are enrolled, but that can't come to campus right now. So throughout the entire school, I will meet with my children on Monday, but I will still send updates to my student that's in the United States just to keep her kind of in the loop. And we'll probably have a Google Meet with her so that she can see everybody. I think that's a lot of what will continue to happen next year for those students that stay enrolled but can't come back to the country yet. I think also we know that it's very likely that there could be second and third waves of the virus that sweep through countries and states and cities. And I think that for me, I feel a little bit more reassured now that we've gone through this. It's funny, I couldn't imagine having, this conversation even a month ago, but now it's like, that's the reality, is that I don't think anyone around here is walking around thinking, oh, this is done, we're good, it's fine. I think we all know that we have to continue to be very, very cautious and think about what this looks like for the students, especially as they adapt to coming back. And then very quickly, it's the end of school. Our school happens to be offering summer schools. So there's 4 weeks where kids will still continue to come on campus if their parents have signed them up. So they'll have a little bit more of an extension of the school year if they are here. But for a lot of kids, they won't. They'll go home and they'll be, in Ho Chi Minh City. And I think that we have already talked about, this would I don't know about seamlessly, but I think now that we've gone through it and we're in our 14th week of it, we feel pretty confident knowing that we could begin virtual school. And, I think that's sort of every teacher's worst, not nightmare, but you don't want to start a school year out with meeting kids on the computer. You really want to be able to be in person with them, but we've already been brainstorming, as teams and thinking about what does that look like if, especially if you have new students. And actually a few of my colleagues have new students that enrolled, and they never got to meet them in person and they just started virtual school. And I thought at first, like, how's that going to work? But it just does because it has to, because that student still has every right to be in the class and be a part of the community, but it's a very different way for him to get to know the teacher. And I think that's what we constantly have to do is think about, where are the children in all of this and how are we best supporting them? And are we asking too much? Are we doing enough? Are we getting enough feedback? Are we, what's the timing like? I think it's this really delicate dance where nobody has the answers, but you have to be talking about the situations and the scenarios because they're quite likely to happen. So I think that, here at Saigon South International School, they are absolutely prepared as a school to go virtual if that's what needs to happen. If the government quickly says kindergartners may not come back, we would continue the year. And I mean, I think part of us on my team are like, it could happen. We were told at least 3 times students would come back and then they didn't. So I think that's why we were so surprised when the decision was made that they would. We all got our hopes, up several times and then we were like, it's just not going to happen. So I think it's an ongoing, flexible, fluid situation where we have to be not even worrying. I think I've tried to really step back from that and think more about, let's be safe, let's take precautions, let's do the right thing for children and for ourselves, but let's also think about multiple scenarios, we might have to continue to do this.
And I think my question to you, Elizabeth, like you talked really nicely about like what your vision is for the future, but what about next week when you have your kindergartners returning? Like what are you thinking you want to focus on? Like what is it going to look like? Because I can see for some teachers we're like, great, I have these 2 weeks, I'm going to cram academics, like I'm going to get everything in them that I wasn't able to do when they're at home. Like I know some people are probably thinking that. I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go about it, but like what is your thinking? Like what does it look like? How are you envisioning this happening? Yeah, what is next week going to look like for you?
Right. I think that's a great question, and we still haven't really, as a team. There are 4 of us on my kindergarten team, and then we have teaching assistants. So there are 9 in our total group with an EAL teacher. And we've all agreed unanimously, this is not about academics in any way, shape, or form. This is about coming back and being together and just being, for some kids, it will mean closure for them if they are moving on to a different school. And even if they're not, this is their kindergarten year still, this is still a very real experience for them, even if most of their time, was not most of their time, but a lot of their time was spent online. So we've already been thinking about really just making sure that they feel like their questions are answered, like they are, I think we all know with kids, especially 5, 6 years, 7-year-old kids, like they don't really want to talk about things for that long, unless they're interested. I mean, I think about, when you were talking about your daughter, Jessie, and some of the questions she'd asked, or the way that she was drawing out some of her ideas. I mean, I think that's what we're going to allow time for is, we've done a lot of work before, like currently, where we're not trying to overdo it with how are you feeling and are you sad, or you don't want to put ideas into children's minds, but we want to make sure we're making space for whatever it is that they're thinking about. And a lot of them, they know exactly what's going on. And I don't think that they feel scared. I think that they are very aware that they have to do certain things when they come back. And we've actually made a video as a team for the kids, and they're usually pretty silly. We've done some plays and skits and like completely made fools of ourselves, but like the kids, have raved and been like, we love seeing you do funny things, because they just need to feel like there's joy here, there really still is, even if we have to do all these things. And initially it was quite strict. We really didn't think children would be able to sit near each other at all, and everyone had to wear a mask all day long. And, like I said, things are loosening up a bit, but even if that's still the case, they need to know that we are here for them, and that this classroom still exists, this community still exists for them, and that their friendships are still alive and well. And it's going to feel a little funny. They're all going to have all the feelings that they do when they come back, but that, my goal is just to be with them, and just to like laugh with them and see them getting to be together, because a lot of them have not gone outside a ton. Some of them have with a sibling, but it's been very much, like you hang out with your family only. So I think there's going to be a lot of emotions. I mean, we've already anticipated some will not want to come to school. Some parents will choose not to bring their children to school. So far, we've, kind of been informally asking them all on Google Meets, and it sounds like everybody's ready to come back, and families are feeling quite confident in sending their children back. So, it's literally 12 and a half days that I get to be with them. And my teaching assistant and I are just super excited to see them and just be with them. And I think we're pretty spontaneous as it is in terms of, we have our routines and our structures, and some of those will change according to social distancing measures that are taken within the school and when we can move throughout the building. But overall, I think they will feel like it's the same for them, and I think that's what I'm hearing from the teachers whose students are already back, is that they've adapted so quickly. They're so happy to see each other. And I actually just a little minute ago, I don't know if you can hear, but there's all kinds of playing going outside of my classroom. And I can see kids that are like touching each other, from far enough away, and they're giving each other air hugs. And it's like, at first that used to make me really sad, I'm like, I want them to be able to hug each other and embrace, but they're okay. They're like, this is what we have to do. We're fine. So I think remembering that too, that kids are really resilient, and like you said, Jesse, if we don't over explain and overdo our information, but we're there for our kids and we listen to them and we're straightforward and honest with them, I think that takes away a lot of the fear that maybe, they could feel in this kind of situation, because I'm watching these kids running around having a great time and everyone's wearing their masks and everyone's like technically, apart, but it feels like they were never gone almost. So I'm imagining, the youngest kids will be the ones maybe feeling lots of emotions. Also, just to sum up, we have a very long walkway all the way back to my classroom, and that'll be very different for them because their parents used to walk them into the classroom and be able to come in here with them and say goodbye to them, and they won't have that opportunity. Parents are not allowed on campus. So I think that'll be interesting to see. They've all grown. It's that part of the year where, they're sort of like, I'm going to grade 1, and they're feeling really proud of it. And I'm wondering what that's going to feel like that for them, to come into school. They're going to be super excited, but there's this like ritual that's now removed from something that they were very used to, where they were escorted to their classroom, and that won't be happening. So we were even talking as teachers, like maybe that'll be good for them, as opposed to if their moms and dads drop them off in the classroom and then it's like, oh, you're leaving, because we know there's going to be separation anxiety. So, I think we're prepared to just be here for them in whatever way that means, whether they physically come to the classroom or they're just still talking with us on Google Meets as a class, that we just have to be respectful of where they are right now, and I think every kid is going to have different emotions the day that they come back. But I am just looking forward to, I think we all know in our work, like it comes out later, it comes out in these different conversations, it comes out in play, it comes out not because I'm saying, how did you feel, over the time that we were gone. I think that's what I'm kind of curious about, is being out on the playground with them and documenting and just sort of hearing those conversations. Like I'm very curious what it's going to look like for them. So,
and particularly like 5s and 6s, they adapt. There's so much adaptability. Honestly, just my own unscientific sort of anecdotal poll of just walking around my neighborhood, the 5-year-olds seem much better at social distancing than the 13-year-old. Perfectly honest.
I agree.
And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen in a school setting, particularly because they're going to be so happy. Like there's going to be anxiety, perhaps. It's going to seem like a change again, but this kids are going to be so happy to see each other. They're going to be so happy to see you. They're going to be so happy to see each other. I guess one thing, and maybe this will be my closing reflection. I'd love to hear, your closing reflection as well. But the question I want to put out there, the thing that I want to think about personally, I'm not saying you have to think about this or anybody else has to think about it, but the thing that I'm thinking about a lot is, what does it look like? Is it important? Is it doable? And if it is important and it is doable, what does it look like to maintain like a class community and identity when some children are there and some children aren't, right? And I think about that from my perspective. I'm about to have another child. My daughter may or may not join her school the moment it opens. Is there an opportunity there for her to stay in touch with what's happening at school as kids go back? Have you thought about that at all? What does it look like when some kids are there, some kids aren't, and they're kind of coming back and forth as things change? Not just back and forth between the school, but like one child will leave and then come back, or maybe another child will leave and then come back for a week.
Yeah, I have. And even now, just talking to 3 of my students this morning, all of their siblings are at school and they're not. And so even that was such a change for them. They didn't say anything to me initially. And I said, oh, I forgot your brother or your sister is here. And they were like, yeah, I'm bored, and they were sort of like okay and happy about it, but they were like, I want to come back to school. It's like they're the last in the school to come back. So there's that feeling of like, you got to go and I haven't gone. So there's that, that family dynamic of who's going to school first, but then there's who's going to come back, because I've tried to do really with my class is be open with them. We did have a student leave the school because her father was being relocated. It was going to happen anyway. And then it ended up where it was this very back and forth thing where they thought they'd be able to stay, but they ended up going to China. So they're no longer in Ho Chi Minh City. So when the class comes back, even though I've mentioned it to them, I really don't think it's going to sink in until they're here. They're going to say, where's Yuha? Why isn't she here? And I think that I've already been trying to think about how we can just kind of talk about and you know, I think read alouds are a huge way that I like to, you know, include and open up dialogue for kids, because sometimes it's easier just to talk about the book and then relate those feelings later to what's really happening. And then the other student that is still a part of our class, but is still in the United States, I think that we absolutely will include her in like our morning meeting or something. I think I'll give them a few days until they're feeling like, let's do that. And I'm waiting for them to ask, you know, I think that's what it's about. It's not even me saying on this day, you know, we're going to do this, but more about when they're like, where is Jennifer? And I'll say, well, let's call her. So I feel like that's what we have to do, is just roll with it and be really open and flexible, you know, because to my knowledge, no one else is leaving this class. They'll all be going to grade 1, but there's still the feeling of summer coming. And then they're going to be talking about, well, are you going to summer school? I'm not, or I'm going to travel here in Vietnam, or I'm going to stay here. So there's still going to be a lot of ambiguity around what that looks like for them. So, you know, to me, it's just about, again, being present and listening and making sure that they have the space to talk about those conversations without me, if I don't need to be a part of them, you know, or maybe I'm just listening too. But I think I've stepped back a lot, you know, since working with both of you, you know, in terms of, I always thought I was like a great listener and I didn't interfere, but we all do it, you know, on some level. We sort of facilitate these conversations and we have an objective and we have these outcomes. And I think that we have to stop doing that with children. You know, I think especially right now, my only expectation is that I show up and they show up and then, you know, we get to be together. But I don't want to look that far ahead to try to force them to do an activity that they don't want to do, or, you know, set up a situation where they talk more. I think I'm just going to have to see how they're feeling when they come back. And then I have a feeling, like you were saying earlier, Jessie, it's like they're pretty, like that independence, you know, it's happening at this age anyway, but that shift of like, you know, I'm really curious how they're going to feel coming back, but then knowing they're going to grade 1, because that's always something kids are proud of. You know, like, I'm going to be a first grader, you know, and they're so excited about that, like moving up. And so I'm just curious where that takes them, and if they bring it up, if they don't bring it up. And I feel like they're the ones that are going to dictate what the next 2 weeks look like when they come in. You know, they're really already telling me they can't wait for the block area, you know, and I've taken them on tours of our classroom, because initially over the holiday, I typically don't move the classroom around without children, but we sort of needed it to be spruced up, and then we were told to take certain things out. Anyway, I moved things around, and I wanted them to know that I had done it. You know, I didn't want them to walk in and be like, oh, our whole room is different. Of course, now they've been gone for so long that it will feel very crazy. But I think even that I'm open to, you know, if they're like, well, can we put this over here? Then let's do that. You know, I mean, I think if that's the way they want to sort of conclude their school year, you know, with each other as a class, and that's what they work on, you know, then that's what we do. And I feel like that's what's going to make them feel like a class and a community, is knowing that whatever it is we do over the next 12 days is what our class does, you know. And maybe it's not the same thing that, you know, our neighbor kindergarten class is doing. And I think that's what we as a team have really said. It's just going to look different in everybody's class, depending on what those kids really need or want to do. That's kind of my closing reflection, you know, on like trying not to be nervous about them coming back or anticipating too much, but just welcoming them, you know, and letting them know that this is still I'm still me, and this is still their room. And, you know, and I think not focusing on the time that we have left, but really just being together.
And I think, you know, I just want to thank you so much for sharing with us. You know, you're at school right now, you know, you've got a lot on your plate. Yeah, I just want to thank you again. I think it would be great to check in maybe once you get onto the other side and you're in summer break.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do another one of these. We could hear more about how that worked out. I really, really, really just want to strongly emphasize what you were saying about listening and about not pushing children to talk about things. Again, children are talking about this and thinking about this nonstop. I can almost guarantee, I mean, I don't want to say in many children's households, in many children's experiences, they are thinking and talking about this. And so they know you are too, right? And they know that we as teachers or as educators are thinking about it too. So it'll be part of their play, it'll be part of what they say. And the more we step back and listen, the more authentic expression of what they're feeling we will hear, right? Because like you said, if you set it up with the objective of, I want to hear you say you missed me, I want to hear you say it was hard, I want to hear how you feel, then you're going to get a response that's adjusted to respond to whatever your needs are. So I think that's a really, really, really critical closing action. Just creating that space for children to be heard, and not worrying too much about what children have to say. So thank you so much.
Thank you both for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elisabeth. And I wanted to say thank you to all the people that are actually watching us. I'm keeping track of them on the comments. We have someone from South Korea, we have someone from Singapore, all of our friends in the US, and then our friend Kim in Australia, who wrote a lovely comment. She said that in the school system that she works in, this week the children are transitioning back to school 2 days a week. And her conversation is work is about supporting teachers, families, and children transitioning back to school. Safety, security, being outdoors, self-care, responsibility, connections, relationships, play, reading, drawing, reflection, community, well-being, not academics, are all that they're stressing. So kind of reiterating what you said, Elisabeth. And so I just feel so fortunate to be working and, talking to all of these wonderful people all around the world that really do have a similar vision for young children and really are thinking about what's best for them right now and not what their adult needs are for them. So yeah, just thank you everybody that's watching. We really appreciate all of you as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
You well. Have fun.